A social media post stirs new controversy, claiming Beto O'Rourke backs people who burn American flags.
I think that there is something inherently American about that.
Is the claim from the Cruz campaign true? We'll see how it scores on the Texas Truthometer. An imposter campaign volunteer starts texting Texas voters.
If you're in the misimpression business, which apparently somebody here is, that's a success.
How the message is raising new questions about which campaign communications you can trust. The state plans to pay less for public schools. We'll look closer at the shift in funding and who's picking up the bill. Hello, and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. Accusations of sabotage add a new twist to the battle for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Ted Cruz. Someone apparently infiltrated a volunteer center for Beto O'Rourke, accessed a database of the Democrats' supporters, then sent out some misleading messages. Phil Prazen takes a closer look.
Staff for the Beto O'Rourke campaign told me someone posing as a volunteer sent this text around Texas. It asks for volunteers to get undocumented immigrants to vote in November, which is of course against the law. One message went to Frank Freeman in Houston.
I thought they just spoofed it and it was somebody kind of goofing off.
Knowing more today, he's more concerned someone would send misleading texts to reinforce what he considers racially based conspiracy theories.
And they've always been looking for evidence for that, so it just kind of plays into that narrative.
I called the number that texted Frank, and it went straight into the mass texting system with no answer.
You know, politics is full of tomfoolery. It's not unusual. What changes is technology and, you know, the method of the tomfoolery.
Executive editor of the Texas Tribune, Ross Ramsey, says we'll be seeing more of this. For the next 2 months, supporters of opposing candidates will try to dilute the other's message.
A lot of people are just going to hear pieces of this, and there's going to be some kind of misimpression left. And if you're in the misimpression business, which apparently somebody here is, that's a success.
I reached out to my contacts at both the political campaigns. The Ted Cruz team tells me they were not involved in this and they don't condone the person who did it. The Beto team tells me they're still looking into what exactly happened and they're going to let me know when they have more details.
A social media post from the Cruz campaign also stirred up some controversy. It claimed that O'Rourke told a person at a campaign event that he's grateful for people who burn or desecrate the American flag. Here's the video in question.
As a voter, I don't know how I would feel to have my own elected representative being open to kneeling on the Senate floor or encouraging and supporting acts that desecrate our American flag.
I think that there is something inherently American about that. And so I'm grateful that people are willing to do that.
So did Beto O'Rourke really say he's grateful for people who burn the flag? Here with the facts of the matter, Gardner Selby of the Austin American-Statesman, which has since 2010 been the headquarters for the nonpartisan fact-checking PolitiFact Texas project. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Well, we saw the edited clip.
Right.
Where did this come from?
It came from a Beto O'Rourke appearance just before Labor Day in El Paso from a town hall. Anyone familiar with the campaign will know that O'Rourke posts videos of all his events. You can watch them endlessly if you want to on Facebook.
You reached out to the O'Rourke campaign. What did they say about this?
Well, even before we reached out to the O'Rourke campaign, we were able to view the video in context and get a feel for what O'Rourke was saying. Let me cut to the chase a little bit. He did not directly answer the question, which was about flag burning or flag desecration. So his statement about something inherently American about that was a vague kind of statement. How vague? Well, he spent the bulk of his answer talking about various things, including his support for nonviolent protesters, even people kneeling in protest, and I think you might have some of that.
Yes, we have a longer clip of his full response.
But when there is use of force, when there is a life taken, and there is not accountability, there is not justice done, there's not the ability to prevent that from continuing to happen in the future, and someone is willing to call attention to that, to try to awaken our conscience, to force us to do the right thing in the face of that injustice and violence, and to do so peacefully and non-violently. I think that there is something inherently American about that. And so I'm grateful that people are willing to do that.
Now, he's not talking about flag burning. He's not really even answering that question at all. Did he ever give his position on that?
Well, not at that event. We didn't hear anything explicit at all. Now, earlier we learned from O'Rourke's campaign, they pointed out a Corpus Christi Caller story quoting O'Rourke saying a few days earlier, "I don't think anyone should burn an American flag." That, again, might not have been important to the person's question in El Paso, but at least it's an indication of one comment on point to the idea of burning flags.
Now, what did the Cruz campaign have to say about these complaints?
They insisted that because the question was about burning or desecrating flags, that something in the answer had to be about that. I think that's a good way of summarizing their response.
So what is the rating on the PolitiFact Truthometer?
Our editors huddled on this and reached the rating of false. It's just an incorrect statement.
Was there any consideration from you guys that this could have been a pants on fire rating instead?
And pants on fire meaning incorrect and ridiculous. There was some discussion of that. The fact that the question centered on the burning the flag at least left in place the possibility of O'Rourke supporting that idea, and also the fact that O'Rourke didn't directly answer it leaves it in the air as to where he is on that particular practice.
All right, you can follow the PolitiFact Project on Twitter under @PolitiFactTexas. Thank you very much, Gardner.
You bet.
Questions of free speech and patriotism get new attention in the race for Senate, but the answers are not as simple as they may have been in past campaigns.
There was a time not very long ago where if you could undermine someone's patriotism, that was a kill shot.
We'll turn to our panel to look closer at the push to sway your opinion and how candidates and voters are responding to the tactics this time around. Big bucks in sports betting, okayed by the feds. But what are the odds the state will cash in? We'll look at who's behind efforts to keep sports betting banned in Texas. We're 6 weeks away from the start of early voting, and the race for Senate is getting heated, with the Ted Cruz campaign attacking Beto O'Rourke on air and online. For perspective, we turn to our reporter roundtable. Jonathan Silver is from the Austin American-Statesman, and John Moritz is with the USA Today Network. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we've seen the Cruz campaign use negative ads in the past, even though he's leading in the polls. Is the tone of this campaign changing?
It is a little bit because Cruz does not want O'Rourke to get past the ceiling where he's at. Maybe it's 45, 46% of the vote. He does not want those moderate independent voters, undecided voters, to find O'Rourke in any way acceptable.
You know, we've seen posts about the NFL players kneeling for the national anthem and a post about flag burning. Is it a surprise that these issues of free speech are getting so much play right now?
I don't think so, because of the age we're in now, post the Trump election, everything's nationalized. So I'm not surprised that that kind of issue is taking a big place in this election, even though it's not something that specifically pertains to Texas in of itself.
Interestingly enough, Cruz last year made a very impassioned defense of unpopular speech in a remarks before the Senate Judiciary Committee. You might even think that it would be him and not O'Rourke coming to Kaepernick's defense and the Take a Knee movement, because he says we must accept and defend unpopular speech.
How do these kind of things really resonate with voters, though?
That's going to be the big question. There was a time not very long ago where if you could undermine someone's patriotism, that was a kill shot. The other candidate is flailing around trying to defend himself, and oftentimes in the process making it worse. It remains to be seen in this era how that's going to play out.
Yeah, how are the other candidates really responding? Are these tactics kind of different than what we've seen in the past?
I think most, I don't think the tactics are new. I think what's different is this race in particular, the Senate race, is very high profile, which is why you're seeing the incumbent, Senator Cruz, using anything he can to try to define his opponent before he's able to.
You know, we've got things like social media and text messaging these days. How is that changing campaigns here in Texas?
Technology just marches along. It was only 2008 when then candidate Obama used Facebook, and it's like, oh my goodness, look at this new tactic. So it only stands to reason that as our devices become more ubiquitous and our means of communication more efficient, that the politicians are going to realize that that's an on-ramp that they can't afford to pass.
You know, we've talked so much about Cruz and O'Rourke. What's the other big race that you want to pay attention to?
I think the Attorney General race might be a sleeper. The Democratic challenger, Justin Nelson, he's trying to use the pre-existing conditions part of Obamacare as a way to kind of get a little traction. As we know, Attorney General Paxton is trying to undermine Obamacare in the courts. Nelson and other Democrats are starting to glom on because who among us does not have someone in our family or our circle that has a pre-existing condition, so we could relate to any challenge to that coverage.
Do you have a favorite that you're watching? What race?
I agree with him. Nelson will not let a moment pass when he uses the name Ken Paxton without saying the word indicted. And I think that he thinks that that's resonating, and I think a lot of people have been responding to that.
All right, Jonathan, John, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
The federal government opens up sports betting nationwide, but so far Texas is not getting in the game.
Sports betting will be unlike the other good ideas. Wink, wink, nod, nod that have come into this state.
We'll look at the effort to keep sports betting out of Texas and who's pushing to expand gambling in the state. Your property taxes are on the rise, and a lot of that money goes to pay for public schools. Now the state could be cutting its share of that bill. What's behind the change, and how lawmakers could soon have new ideas to tweak the system? The Texas Education Agency is asking lawmakers for less money in the main way it pays for your neighborhood school, $1.5 billion less. The reason? Texas expects your property taxes will go up and assumes lawmakers won't have to pony up as much. Politics reporter Phil Prazen went digging into the documents to find answers.
It's 425 pages, and it's how the Texas Education Agency officially asks for money from lawmakers. A few lines are bad news for property taxpayers. The state estimates our property values will go up by more than 6%, so TEA is asking lawmakers for more than $1 billion less.
It does impact classrooms.
AISD School Board trustee Julie Cowan says this system stops many districts, like Austin's, from doing new or different things.
We want to pay our teachers more and those that touch our children more. We just don't have those dollars to raise the salaries in AISD.
Now, state lawmakers are allowing more money to go into the system for population growth. More and more kids are just going to Texas schools. But most of that money still comes from local property taxes. In the next few years, property taxpayers will fund nearly 70% of school needs. Lawmakers tried to change that last year, but couldn't agree on how.
This was front and center, was the need for the state to, I guess, take up more of its share.
There is a special state commission looking into a solution, but will that lower your property tax bill or get more money into education? We'll find out after the November election, when lawmakers return to the Capitol. Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
Texas lawmakers are supposed to take a look at ways to change the system the state uses to pay for public schools, but it won't be easy. Joining us for perspective is Josh Sanderson from the Equity Center, a nonprofit focused on school finance issues. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me about your nonprofit. Really, what do you guys do?
We represent about 650 school districts across the state, largely low and mid-wealth districts, and we do consulting and advocacy and helping them to better utilize state funding for public education purposes. And we also provide information to the legislature to help inform their decisions, their policy decisions on school finance issues.
You put out a plan that aims to balance the needs of taxpayers and school children. How is this different from the current system?
The current system is largely inequitable as it pertains to both taxpayers and school children funding. And what I mean by that is that if you look at what one taxpayer in one district can generate for their tax effort, with their tax effort for their school children, compare that to a different district, it varies wildly. You have some districts in the state taxing at the state cap, which is $1.17, and generating $6,000 a kid. You have other districts in the state that can tax at 70 cents and generate $9,000, $10,000 a kid. And so there are disparities both in tax burden on taxpayers and on students as it pertains to their funding levels.
Now, right now, the Texas Commission on Public School Finance is working on a series of recommendations for lawmakers. You're following that closely. Are you seeing any progress there?
We're seeing a lot of progress in that there are conversations about policy changes taking place that have not occurred in the past. This is the very beginning of that process, and that these recommendations from the Commission will be delivered to the legislature in January. And at that time, we'll see where the rubber hits the road, if you will, where the debates will occur as to what the proper reform should be, and then whether or not the political will exists to do it.
They talk about school finance every session, so what's going to be different about this one?
Making a bet on what the legislature will do is a losing proposition. I'm hoping that this time around we have a number of factors that drives the legislature to actually take action. The most important being that if no action's taken, it's the legislature saying the current system that we have today is acceptable. And I don't think that that sentiment exists either within the legislative bodies or within the public at large. And so there is an appetite for change, an appetite for reform in the way that we fund our schools, both on our over-reliance, some would argue, on property taxes, and the amount we're actually spending on students for public education purposes.
Do you feel like rural lawmakers or the urban lawmakers are more responsive to what your group is pushing?
I don't think that you can simplify it down into those factions necessarily. I think you have people that understand the intricacies of the school finance formulas, how complicated it is, and how really it doesn't need to be that complicated, about how we are over-reliant on things that we have done in the past 20 and 30 years ago that we still do today, that we still utilize today, simply because it's been the easiest way to do it, not necessarily because it's the right way to do it. I think you have members who are in tune with their school districts that understand things need to change for the better, and we have those answers. They just have to take action to put them into place.
Josh Sanderson, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
The Supreme Court cleared the way for states to legalize sports betting. Now some state lawmakers want Texas to get in the game.
And in my opinion, government shouldn't come in and say, you can't play fantasy football. It's just dumb.
But there's also a powerful push against gambling. We'll look at who has the upper hand next on State of Texas. This is the first Sunday of the NFL season, a big day for football fans and for gamblers. People in every state place bets on those games. Most of them do it illegally, but that could soon change thanks to a Supreme Court ruling earlier this year that overturned the federal ban on sports betting outside of Nevada. Now states are scrambling to cash in, but John Dabkovich shows us why Texas is not likely to get in the game.
Josh, it starts with the state constitution. It very clearly bans games of chance. But we have a lottery in Texas that only came about after an amendment to the Constitution, and it has pumped billions into Texas schools. But it would take another amendment like that to allow sports betting in Texas, but that seems like a long shot. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has gone on the record saying he opposes legalized gambling in Texas. So have Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick.
You know, anywhere from $100 to $500 a game.
This man, who we'll call Steve, has been illegally betting on sports in Texas for 20 years. What do you enjoy about it?
You know, it's an interesting question. I think some of it just has to do with the ability to predict and be right.
He showed us the website he uses to place bets with his bookie, who is also in Texas.
The fact of the matter is this is happening. I don't think it's slowing. I think if the state were to take advantage of regulation, they would recognize some benefits from it as well.
Benefits like cash. The Texas Lottery says it contributed $1.3 billion to Texas schools last year. And even the most conservative estimates say the sports betting industry is at least as big.
Sports betting will be not unlike the other good ideas, wink, wink, nod, nod, that have come into this state.
Rob Kohler is a lobbyist representing the nearly 3 million members of the General Baptist Convention of Texas, a powerful voting bloc that not only opposes legalized gambling, but would also like to see the lottery repealed. Their argument? Gambling in any form is a regressive tax that hits poor people the hardest, people who in some cases are already getting government assistance.
It'd make a sales tax blush on the question of regressivity. So, you know, is it smart for us to fund our government predominantly from the folks that we're giving money to help? No.
And research does show low-income people are more likely to gamble than wealthier people. But attitudes towards sports betting have changed, evidenced by the NBA's recent partnership with casino giant MGM. But at the state capitol, gambling has been a losing bet.
There's just some things government shouldn't do. And in my opinion, government shouldn't come in and say, you can't play fantasy football. It's just dumb.
Laredo Democrat Richard Pena Raymond is the closest thing to a gambling supporter at the Capitol. He authored a bill that would have made fantasy football sites like DraftKings legal in Texas. But even he is quick to draw a line between playing fantasy football and actually betting on games.
It's a relatively nuanced difference, but it's a big difference. I don't intend to be the person who introduces legislation with reference to sports gambling, but I have to imagine that some of my colleagues will. And we'll just see how it goes.
Would you support that?
You know, it would depend. I have to tell you, I don't bet on sports. I don't bet on games.
People will find the avenues, whatever that's a bookie or an offshore account.
Raymond says he plans to reintroduce his fantasy football bill next year. But as for sports betting, there may be some softening on the issue. In 2010, Texas Republicans said in their official platform they wanted to repeal the lottery and they didn't want any lottery money to be used to expand state programs. Now, it simply says they oppose the expansion of legalized gambling. Josh?
Thanks, John. One state representative is pushing a plan to expand sports gambling beyond fantasy games. Democrat Eddie Lucio III tells us he's drafted a bill to legalize sports betting in Texas. He says it could help schools and other state programs by bringing in money that's going to other states. Lucio says it's time to keep that revenue here at home. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.